and Martin second. Hello,
Okay.
UK Crime Book Club. We are live on Saturday night. How exciting. So I've got Doug Stewart with me, Douglas Stewart and Martin Edwards, and they're going to introduce themselves and tell you a bit about their work before we start grilling them. Doug, do you want to go first?
Yeah, surely. Okay, well, I've been an author for far too long, probably over 35 years. And in that time, I've written 15 books or so. And this, if you get it on the screen, is my most recent one, if you can see it.
You've got to be like a weather girl and go the opposite way to what you think.
Oh, yeah, that's it. Devil in Vegas. Anyway, the clue's in the title. It's about an Englishman from London. His sister is cheated badly in a London casino, and she says, if anything happens to me while I'm tracking down these swines who cheated me, you've never got to let go. And she then dies mysteriously. And he's not really the most suitable person to take on organized crime, but he does. And the trail takes him to Panama and then into the USA, particularly Las Vegas. And he's up against some pretty unpleasant people. And he brings in some allies who help him. And it races through, a lot of action, a lot of drama, and I hope an ending that is, well, certainly being well received. I think it was terrific.
Fantastic. And Martin?
Yes, thanks, Sam. Well, like Doug, I've been writing for a long time, not quite as long, but like him also, I'm a lawyer, a recovering lawyer in my case, as well as a crime writer, and writing was a lifelong passion. I think the internet went just then.
Oh,
okay. Yeah. Well,
so we'll let Martin sign back in and reintroduce himself.
The mafia got him or something.
In a moment. So we've got, just checking in case he's sending me a message, but I don't think he has. Okay, so he'll sign back in a moment anyway. So where do we begin? I mean, we've already talked about the long day that you've had today. Just on a normal day, you work extraordinary hours.
Yes, but I don't regard anything really as hard work. Of course it is, but that's not my philosophy. My philosophy is that life's to be enjoyed. I love doing my other work as a lawyer. I love doing my writing. Whatever I'm doing, it's just sheer pleasure. And compared with the people who have to do drudge jobs day in, day out, I have been truly blessed.
Do you find it easy to switch between them?
Yes, I do actually. It's a bit like sort of turning the light on and off, and I have my dream world and my other world, and the day job, being a lawyer, sitting as a tribunal chairman, is totally different. But that's escapism from writing. But my two lives have always fed off each other, and I'm sure that my good friend Martin has had exactly the same experience.
Yeah.
Being a lawyer is very helpful to being a writer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Should we have another go, Martin?
Yes. Well, crime novels are full of unexpected twists and turns, and so is technology, at least when I've got anything to do with it, I'm afraid. So, yes, I'm sorry about that. Not sure what happened, but I shall reintroduce myself whilst I have the chance, at least. I was saying before that I've had a lifelong ambition to become a crime writer. First book was published way back in 1991, first crime novel. That was the start of a series set in Liverpool. I've also written more recently a series set in the Lake District, and I'm returning to that series this summer with a new book set in the Lakes. But in the past couple of years, I've written a couple of books set in the Golden Age, in effect, in 1930, introducing a new character, and these are books called Gallows Court. That's the first book that introduces Rachel Savernake, and then Mortmain Hall is the sequel to that book. And earlier this afternoon, I was working on book number 3 in that series. I recently signed a contract with the publishers, 2 more books, which I'm very excited about. So I've written a mixture of mainly contemporary whodunits, but also these couple of historical stories as well. And I've edited quite a lot of anthologies. I'm a consultant to British Libraries Crime Classics, and I've written non-fiction books, some legal books in the distant past, but also more recently a book called Golden Age of Murder, which was a study of the detection club in the 1930s. So a mixed bag, really.
Really is. You are both so busy. I don't know how you find time to do so many different things.
Probably because we both love it.
Yeah, well, as Doug says, and I've always shared this view, it's important to enjoy what you do because life is very short, and so when you get the chance to write, I think it's important to seize it, and I've certainly thought a lot about this during the pandemic, this terrible time that's affected everybody across the world, and it's brought all sorts of tragedy and misfortune. And it's easy to be very distressed about it for good reason. But what I've tried to do in the past 12 months is to find ways to come to terms with this new strange existence that none of us ever anticipated. And the one thing it's given me that I've never had before is the chance to write pretty much full time. Because I've been working as a lawyer, I've never had that opportunity. I've always been fitting it in, and I've really tried to make the most of that. So I've written quite literally every day since the start of the first lockdown, caught up on various deadlines, and it's been both therapeutic. It's been good for me, good for well-being, I think, but also a lot of fun and rewarding, and also, of course, things like the UK Crime Book Club, social media, that give you opportunities to reach out to readers when you can't meet people in person at festivals, at library events and book clubs and so on. So I think it's very much about making the most of what you have. To use Doug's terms, doing your best with the hand that you're dealt, the cards that you're dealt with. I think that's the way I've tried to look at it.
Well, I know that I've not written, I've used you lovely author members as a form of procrastination, I think. Should be writing, but instead I'm reading and interviewing. Making me very happy though. It is, you write about doing the hand that you dealt, and this has been my saviour. I do think that.
I think so, and I often find when I talk to people who have had very terrible difficulties in life, and I've been very fortunate in my life for sure, but when you talk to people who face terrible setbacks, it can be very inspiring to see how even given those setbacks, they find a way through, and I think it's a good example to the rest of us that where I can, I try to learn from it, and writing is great. It's famously a lonely profession, isn't it? But it's also got this ability to connect you with people across the globe, and even if you can't travel, you can meet people online, and that's as we're doing right now, technology permitting, and that I think is really rather wonderful and exciting.
Trying to look to see who is commenting on our video, because I've not got names, but for some reason it's not showing there. So let's just dive in with Caroline Maston. Hi, Kaz. She wants to know where's the best book. What is the best book of yours to start reading, Douglas? And I'm going to put that to both of you. So obviously you have various series and different things. So let's start with Doug.
Okay, well, why not start with Deadline Vegas, which is the latest one.
And it's really good.
Oh, thank you for that. It's a one-off, whereas the 2 previous books, well, the first 2 of a series of 3 or more involving a London detective who very rarely sits on a seat in London. He's mainly on aeroplanes jetting around the world, sorting the world's problems out. Match fixing in Dead Fix, or drug running through the Bahamas in Hard Place. So why not start with Deadline Vegas? See if you like that. If you love the casino world and want to see the dark, steamy side of it, that book says it all. After all, I did live in Vegas for 7 years, so I've seen a thing or two and heard an awful lot more. My lips are mainly sealed.
I always think if you've heard the same kind of story from 3 separate people, it's okay. It's not a personal story anymore. It's a collective, and it frees you up a little bit.
Right.
Martin, how about you? Where's the best place to start with yours?
Well, I've mainly written series. I've written a couple of standalones as well, and one question for all readers when they look at a series is, do I need to start at the beginning? And I think that's often, of course, it's a very good place to start. But there's one thing I really think about a lot when I'm writing books within a series, and that is you've got to do 2 things, I think. First of all, you've got to appeal to new readers. So you can't bury them with information. They've got to get into the story quickly. But at the same time, you've got to keep faith with your existing readers, the people who've been loyal to in the early books in the series. So you don't want to repeat too much. So there's quite a tricky balance to strike there. And I think a lot about how to try to do that in a reasonable way. So I like to think that you can pick up my series books in any particular order. But certainly, if you like contemporary crime, the first book in the Lake District mystery series is The Coffin Trail. And then the first book set in 1930, which is very much one of my favourites, is a book called Gallows Court. And that was an attempt I made to write something very different from all my other books. And it's a gamble because I didn't have a publishing deal or anything like that. I spent 3 years of my life creating this character, Rachel Savanaik, and the strange world she inhabits in 1930s London. So it's an experiment, and luckily for me, it worked. I got a great publishing deal, and it did well. It was nominated for the Historical Dagger and another award as well. And then Mortmain Hall, the sequel, followed it, and that's quite a different book. That's less of a thriller and more of a classic detective story. And at the end of Mortmain Hall, there's a clue finder, which lists 34 clues in the novel that you may have missed as you're reading. I hope you've missed some of them anyway as a reader. But it's a way of playing fair with the reader, confirming that the clues are there in the story, even though it's quite an intricate mystery. And that was a great fun book to write from my point of view. So Mortmain Hall is very much a personal favourite, even though it's not the first of the Rachel books.
It's a very clever idea as well. And you go back through, and I mean, even without the clue finder, when you go back through somebody's book and you think, how did they do that? What did I miss that was glaringly obvious or should have been? It's such a special skill. No, it's mind-boggling. I think that's what puts me off writing a bit more. I'm not sure I've got it yet. We'll see.
Well, you shouldn't be put off, Sam, because there are all kinds of different crime novels, as we know, and all kinds of different ways of writing them. That Mortmain Hall, for me, was just an attempt to do something very intricate and complex, but I hope also satisfying, where all these different pieces finally come together. But the idea of that book was a challenging one, because the idea was that the reader shouldn't be quite sure what mystery they're trying to solve. There's a lot going on, a lot of stuff happens, but what is it really all about? And I decided to try writing a book where it wasn't clear that there isn't a simple mystery that is followed in a linear progression. It goes around all over the place. some people like that, some people don't. But it was great fun to ride, and finally pulling all those different strands together was very satisfying. It's nerve-wracking when you're not quite sure they are going to come together, but when it finally works out, it makes it all worthwhile.
The inside of your heads must be an interesting place, my friend. So Kaz has asked another great question. Now, I already kind of know the answer to this one, but it's a good story. So, Doug, I'm going to ask you, and then obviously, Martin, you can fill in as well. But how you know each other? You've been friends for a long time.
Okay, well, it's not an exciting story, but it was a very interesting one. I think I actually started writing about 3 books ahead of Martin. He's overtaken me by hundreds now, but we're going back probably 25 to 30 years to when I was still a solicitor in London, and I'd had my books published. And then I saw in the Law Gazette, I think it was, that Martin had written a book, or maybe 1 or 2 books, about Harry Devlin set in Liverpool. And so I contacted him, and I met him in London. We had a lunch or drinks or something or another, and we've stayed in contact ever since. And I've watched him rise to glory and fame from my footstool here, where I now sit on the Isle of Man.
One of the happy memories I have, Doug, is when we met up in the States a couple of times. Once there was a convention in Las Vegas when you were living in Henderson, not too far away, and I came to that lovely house you have in the desert. Very memorable. I can picture it. I can picture it now. And scorpions on the ground, all that sort of. It's scary, but very exciting. And then there was that other time when we drove around the Arizona desert, and that was great fun as well. That was 13 years ago, something like that. But, very memorable.
Very memorable. We went to the Poison Pen where you were doing a presentation, as I recall.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Poison Pen is a wonderful bookshop in Scottsdale in Arizona, and the people who own it, Barbara Peters and Rob Rosenwald, very good friends of mine nowadays. They established Poison Pen Press, a crime imprint in the States, and they've been my publishers in the States for many years, and they've gone from strength to strength. Now a very major publisher in the States, but the shop continues. I'm delighted to say if anybody ever goes to that part of the world, Arizona, the Poison Pen bookstore is a must to visit. It's basically just a crime bookshop, and they've got everything. And they do events nearly every evening. It's a phenomenal place.
So I'm going to ask you about travel. You've both travelled to lots of places. I want to know how many of them you've already used in a book, but are there any that you're looking forward to using at some point in the future, somewhere that you've been holding on to for just the right idea to go with it? Doug, let's start with you again.
I think I've worked in just over 70 countries around the world now. And some of them are featured in, there's quite a lot of them have, I guess, and a lot are featured in my other former business life. But I'm a great fan of Slovenia. I love Slovenia. I was the first lawyer to open an office there, first Western lawyer, in effect, when the Yugoslavia broke up and after the war there. And I love the country, and I'm sure that there's a book there. I think it's the capital of America's espionage in Europe. Not many people know that. Well, they might do now. And I'm sure there's a story there. It's a great country. It's got a bit of everything, with a lovely climate, but also lovely mountains and snow, and great people, food, a lot of atmosphere. Could be a great story involving that.
You should go for it. You should go for it, Doug. I've only ever been once to a place called Piran, I think, on the coast, which I thought was fantastic. But yes, you must do it.
Oh, yeah, you write that and I will read that.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
It's been buzzing around in my head for the next book about my London detective, in fact. The third book, I was going to bring Slovenia into it, and thanks for the encouragement.
Yeah,
I'll
look
get
forward
on
to
the
reading
plane when
more.
we're allowed to.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I've very often my novels have always been set in Britain, but I write a lot of short stories. And I love short stories, and I've set a lot of those in places that I've visited. I think I'd be nervous about writing a full-length novel about a place I didn't know very well. But if you go to somewhere on holiday, you can certainly learn enough about the place to write a short story, maybe. And so I've written stories set in a variety of places. Hawaii, I went to for a crime conference, Left Coast Crime, a few years ago, and I wrote a story called Catch of the Day, set in Hawaii on the back of that. And one of the most remarkable festivals I went to, not long before the outbreak in Wuhan, as it turned out, was a mystery game expo in Shanghai. I'd never been to China before, and I was invited to go to this mystery game expo. Sounded very strange. I was slightly nervous about it, and I was invited by people who were clearly very passionate about detective fiction. And in the end, I went along, and I was absolutely astonished. I really liked Shanghai. I was there for 5 days, and it was glorious. I was taken all over the place. I was treated enormously well. But the expo, the exhibition, which was dedicated to mystery games and detective fiction, was astonishing because thousands of people turned up. And in the course of that 5 days, I doubt if I met a single person who was over the age of 35. And what has happened in China, I discovered, is that young people have fallen in love with detective fiction and with games, often very, very complicated games, that make Mortmain Hall look very straightforward in plot terms. And they play these games for hours on end. And there are millions of young Chinese people in these mystery game clubs. And they've developed a great enthusiasm for classic British detective fiction. I've become very friendly with a number of the Chinese people I met. We correspond regularly. And it's fascinating to come across people of a different generation from me, very different background, but with this same enthusiasm for detective fiction. I've learned a lot from them. I very much enjoy their company. I long for the day when I could go back there, meet them again. But I've not written a story set in China, but that's something I might well consider. And flowing on from this, my books have started to sell in China in translation, and that's again something that I never anticipated. And it's of course I can't judge the translation because I don't speak Chinese, but you know, it's the publishers are wonderful, and it's been an utterly enthralling experience, and it just shows this writing game. It is, as we were saying earlier, it's full of unexpected turns. It has its down moments. All writers experience them, but it also has these wonderful unexpected highs as well, and that's the reward, I guess, for sticking at it.
So if you mentioned Hawaii just now, and that reminds me that my book, written a long time ago, published by the Collins Crime Club, was Seller's Market, about a wine war between France and the USA, where the French wine growers were in disgrace for all sorts of reasons. And that was the plot. But it climaxed in Hawaii, where one of the world's leading wine experts happened to live, or alternatively, where I happened to have been on holiday.
And so in those days, you'd been working with the legendary Collins Crime Club editor, Elizabeth Walter. Someone I met once or twice. Fascinating woman, and you must have worked with her.
I certainly did. Yes, she was a brilliant editor, a lovely lady, and she taught me a lot of things. She edited Sellers Market brilliantly, but she told me this wonderful story about John le Carre, and she was editing John le Carre, who even then, 25 to 30 years ago, was selling trillions of books every year. And she said, John le Carre could be a really good author if I was allowed to edit his books. But under his contract, we're not allowed to touch them.
Wow.
I thought that is amazing that she could see flaws there in what to most people would say is one of the great authors of perfect prose and drama.
Absolutely, one of the superstars of the genre, sadly.
She would rent blood everywhere on his books from what she was saying. Quite extraordinary.
She discovered Reginald Hill, didn't she?
Yes.
The man who created the Ellen Pascoe. Wonderful writer. Good friend of mine. Fantastic series of novels. If anybody's watching has seen the TV series but not read the books, well, Reginald Hill is someone I learned a lot from as a young writer, and his books are incredibly entertaining and stand up. Yeah, some of them were written in the 70s. They still read very well today.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, one of the great names. Yeah. I see somebody's commented that I'm very posh because I drink wine from a glass. Well,
I wonder if that's somebody having. Oh no, it's it's David Gilchrist. He's having a dig at me with my mug. But as I was explaining,
I could say that my wife and I once drank red wine out of tooth mugs, so it can be a great leveler.
Because I'm a teaching assistant, I disguise my alcohol. Everybody knows what I'm drinking, but any child who I work with who gets a picture of me, and they don't know that I do this, but they'll get a picture. It looks like I'm having a cup of tea. I could even blow on it for effect, but I won't. Because
this is the crime novelist's mind at work, you see, Sam.
So David Gilchrist did say hi to both of you.
Hello, David.
Hello there, David.
And we've got Philip Jordan. Hi, Phil. Last year has definitely brought silver lining in regard to time. Have you learned anything over the course of your writing that you wish you knew when you started? That's from Philip. So, should we go with you?
You go first, right, Martin. I'll think about that one.
Okay.
Well, I think that of course, over the years, you learn a lot about the craft and and you gain in confidence, because confidence is important in life, and morale is important in life, and it's certainly important in writing, because the more confident you are as a writer, the more chances you take and more interesting things you try to do. They don't always work, but it's important to be ambitious. That's what I do believe. You need to keep stretching, not just do the same old. That doesn't appeal to me at all. Even within a series, I think it's very desirable to do something a little bit different with each and every book, and that's what I try to do. Keep the readers on the toes to some extent. But there's one thing I've always believed. I wouldn't say so much that I've learned it, except that I've learned that it's right, and it's this, that I think that the writing life is, as I've mentioned before, it's one where there are ups, there are highs, there are also downs. And I don't actually know any writer who hasn't experienced the downs, even the million sellers over the years. There are always setbacks along the way, however gifted you are, however successful you are. And one of the things I really regret is that over the years I've been involved, I've been chair of the Crime Writers Association, president of the Detection Club, I've seen a lot of really good writers come and go because they've become discouraged for whatever reason. It may be they've been dropped by a publisher. It may be that they've found that they've written a book that hasn't really worked. Whatever it may be, and they've they've ceased to write, they've ceased to write crime. And so a real talent has been lost. And I've seen that a number of times. I really regret that. And I do think that it is important, so far as you can do, to stick at it. Not always easy, but even when you're having a rough patch as a writer, as I say, we all have them. I've been dropped by publishers right, left, and centre over the years, and it's been a long haul. But I've always been committed to it, and I'm glad about that. I'm glad that I've stuck at it, because I've been very lucky, because my career has followed ultimately an upward path. In the last few years have definitely been the best in terms of sales, awards, or anything else, but reviews. But regardless of that, I think it's really important to keep at it, even when you're discouraged, when things aren't going so well, because you only have to have a lucky break and things will change for the better. You do need luck, as we do in life. You do need that lucky break, but of course, if you don't buy a ticket, you don't win the lottery, kind of thing. And so I do think that the great thing I've learned, and that I believe, is that it's about persistence, keeping at it, believing in yourself, even if you're driven to feel that nobody else believes in you and what you write. And the one thing I've tried to do from day one is write books that I believe in, whether or not a particular publisher believed in them. Sometimes the publisher might have been right not to believe in them, but even so, I've written the books that I believe in. And in the long run, I think that's the way to go, certainly the way that I have faith in, rather than trying to follow the market. What's the latest bestseller? Trying to follow the fashion. It's fine, it can work for a while, but it's not necessarily good for your long-term health as a writer, I tend to think. So I think writing what you believe in, writing to the best of your ability, is the way to go. And if it doesn't work, you keep at it and hope that eventually you do get that lucky break that takes you one or two steps up the ladder. That's what I would say in answer to that question.
Philip's a fairly new author, so he might be taking some inspiration from your words. So, Doug, what do you think?
I think that I wish I had listened to Elizabeth Walter a little bit more, and that was endorsed when I had the privilege. I think probably Martin was there as well. I met Lee Child, who Martin obviously will know well. He said the same thing as Elizabeth Walter, that it pays to stick with a character. Publishers like it, having a series of books. And I did start at the very beginning of my career with the same character, but I got bored writing about the same character. And so then I moved to Collins with Elizabeth Walter, and I wrote a one-off there. But she said, no, I want you to stick with this character. I like him. Do another 2 or 3. And I said, I'm already starting with a new character already with something else. And she said, big mistake. And I'm not saying she was completely wrong. She was completely right. It would have been far more commercially accessible if I had stuck with her with the same character. And that's why I'm now writing with a London detective, developing the series, although I've done a one-off, because I've got a low boredom threshold, and writing the same character is less challenging in a sense, because you've got the same character. I like having new characters, new ideas, but I know what's commercial now. I've learned the lesson, the hard way, I suppose.
In a way, though, it must be challenging in itself to just keep that character busy and find them interesting things to do and keep that side of it alive. That must be really difficult as well.
Well, that's right, Sam, and that is the danger with a series. that it becomes formulaic. You start repeating yourself, and it does happen. We all know series we've read where that has happened, and it's unfortunate. And that's the reason why, as I mentioned before, when I'm writing series, I like each book to be slightly different. So the next Lake District book, The Crooked Shore, comes out in summer, is written in a different way from the previous ones, and not just a different part of Cumbria, but a slightly different style of story. And in each of the books in that series, I've run the changes. So the last one, The Dungeon House, was again somewhat different from the previous books. And having that variety is really important within a series, because you as the writer need to keep fresh and engaged. Because if you're not, then the reader won't be really. So it's not a great way to go. And we talked about Reg Hill earlier. That was one of the things he very much believed in. He was extremely prolific, and he didn't write 2 Dion Pascoe novels in succession. He always wrote something different. Now, I don't write as much as he did, but when he gave me that advice many years ago, I adapted it to suit my approach. So when I finished a novel, I will write a couple of short stories before I go back to a series. Or now I'm switching in between different series. So you've got the variety, and it keeps you fresh, and that freshness is really important, because, as Doug says, the danger is that you just get a bit fed up. And that's not a good thing, is it?
Well, I got round it with my London detective in Hard Place. He was based around Clapham area. The next book, he'd moved to a different police station to give it, place is a character in itself in a way. Yeah. So that changed it, and obviously the plot lines are very different. Yeah. And the next one, he will have moved to a different section of the police force, doing different things. So I'm working around it, because it is. I mean, even one of the UK's very best known prolific crime writers has been accused of getting too formulaic, hugely successful, but so much is the same, and that's a trap I would hate to fall into.
Yeah, and there are different techniques, and I think if we talk about Lee Child, one of the mega sellers of the last 30 years, it's interesting that some of the Jack Reacher books are told in the third person, but he's also written in the first person. So he varies the viewpoint sometimes. That's a good technique. There are all kinds of structural ways that you can play around with the crime novel. The crime novel's infinitely flexible. There are all kinds of ways of varying your approach if you think about it. And you can do that even within a series. Sorry, Sam.
So quite risky, though, to go from writing in one, first person, and then another one in third person. You could risk alienating loyal readers. It could be quite jarring.
Well, that is true. There is a risk in varying your approach. But when you have somebody like Lee, who's so accomplished at what he does, one of the great thriller writers, beyond a doubt, he's managed it incredibly successfully, and it can be done. And I do think that this is one of the things about writing. You can play safe all the time, but where's the fun in that? I think that one of the great things about writing is it's escapism. It's not real life. We've had a lot of real life in the last 12 months. So glad to escape with it, and you can take. I'm one of life's wimps in real life, that's for sure. But in fiction writing, you can take risks, you can take chances, do something different, go to different places, meet different kinds of people, do dangerous things, and it's exciting and it's rewarding. So taking those risks, as I said earlier, it doesn't always work. So sometimes you may have to either scrap a book or rewrite it, or it may need a lot of editing. But taking the risks is still worthwhile because it keeps what you're doing alive, and hopefully you're attracting new readers all the time, as well as, with any luck, not infuriating the people who've stuck with you all these years.
I did try writing one book in the first person and gave it up. I realized that style just wasn't for me, and I really admire an author like Lee Child who can write so successfully in that genre. I think it very challenging. I don't know whether Martin has written any of the full-length novels in the first person.
No. Well, the one that is sort of an exception is a standalone book called Dancing for the Hangman, which is the story of Dr. Crippen, basically told from his point of view. And that was a book that got well reviewed, didn't sell particularly well, but it's a book I'm very proud of, and I'd like to bring back one day, because of course it's set in 1910, so it's not going to date too much now. But that again was an experiment, so I was hoping to break through with it. Didn't really happen for me with that book at the time, but it was a book I was very proud of, and I think it's an illustration of the point I've been trying to make, that although in commercial terms it didn't work for me, it didn't sell lots of copies at all. Most people have never heard of it, but it was a very satisfying book to write, and I'm really, really glad I wrote it. I'm proud of it as a novel, and it was part of my continuing learning process as a writer, doing it in this very different way, different period, and that kind of thing. And sometimes I think you do these things, and it may not have instant rewards, but it helps you to develop as a writer, and then, you know, maybe 2 or 3 books down the line, something clicks, and you have one of those lucky breaks I mentioned.
So I see there's a question about how did I start writing? I guess in my case, I always had an interest in English, but I was lucky to be taught at school by an English teacher called Humphrey Household. He was never famous, but his brother was Geoffrey Household, who wrote Rogue Male, which is one of the great classics of all time. And I was privileged enough to meet him when I was about 12, which was fascinating, although I didn't realize quite how famous he was, except that I knew he was an author, which was very impressive. And then I met Hammond Innes, who went to the same school as me, and that really did inspire me, meeting him. And at university, I worked on the university newspaper doing interviews and things, so I was getting my writing experience. And then after I got married and had 2 young children, I was sort of trying to think what else I could do to escape from the noise. And so I could shut myself in another room and say, I'm going to write a book, and my wife would go around saying, "Shh, Daddy's busy writing." So I got a little bit of peace and quiet, and that's where it all started.
Martin, how about you?
In my case, I discovered Agatha Christie when I was 8 years old, and I can really date my enthusiasm for crime fiction, and really to that time. Murder at the Vicarage was the first book I read at the age of 8, and there were 2 things. First of all, I fell in love with the idea of detective fiction, and secondly, at the same time, I fell in love with the idea of writing detective stories. That became my ambition, and I still have my first effort. Melvin Hughes and the Big Four. This is it. It's falling to pieces now, but it's 70 pages of painstakingly handwritten thriller, really, a sort of shameless rip-off of Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie, which I wrote when I was 10. I wrote a series of Melvin Hughes books. I've got them to this day, and thankfully they never got into print, not surprisingly. But but it goes back that far. It was an obsession and an ambition. The only ambition I've ever had, really, was to become a crime writer and to write a number of crime stories. I fell in love with the idea of writing a series about good old Melwyn. And so that was what drove me on. It took me a long time to actually achieve that ambition. Because when I told my parents when I was a child, they'd never met any writers and didn't know any writers, but they had a shrewd idea that it was more difficult than I expected. And so I said, you need to get a proper job. So we had that debate for years and years and years, and eventually I surrendered. They borrowed a book one day from the local library by Michael Gilbert, and they read a biographical note on the back that said he was a solicitor who wrote his novels on the train going into work. So they said, there you are, become a solicitor and write your books on the train. And so you've got a proper job as well, so you've got some money. And so I didn't become a solicitor, but unfortunately for me, I've never lived on a train route that took me from home to my office, so I was never able to do what Michael Gilbert did. But many years later, I met him. He actually gave a blurb for one of my books, which was rather wonderful. So eventually things come around in a great big circle, and that influence was very benign, because although I didn't have the ambition to become a solicitor, I actually found I enjoyed it. I still enjoy doing a bit of law. I do it part-time now. But the other thing is, going back to what we were saying earlier about keeping at it, it's a great advantage if you've got another income stream in your life, you've got a day job, so you're not completely dependent on the whim of a publisher for surviving. And so that has certainly helped me to keep going in the meantime. And it has certainly helped me to stick to this principle of writing what I want to write rather than what a publisher tells me or asks me to write, which is not the way I've ever wanted to go. But it doesn't half help if you've got the money coming in from somewhere else at the same time.
Funnily enough, I met Michael Gilbert when I was about 7, but it really meant nothing to me at all. He lived in the same hometown as me in Folkestone in Kent.
Right.
And he used to commute to London.
Mm.
My father knew him quite well.
Right.
And I could see he had plenty of time to write, because that train chugged through the Weald of Kent up 1 hour, 40 minutes each way on a good day. And so he could have finished a book in a couple of weeks, I should think.
He once upset somebody, a fellow crime writer, because the other crime writer refused to believe that he could produce these books only writing on the train, and she said to him, it's impossible. You've got one train journey in the morning, one train journey in the evening. You can't possibly write as many books as you do. He said, you've misunderstood me. I only write in the morning, on the morning train. I'm too tired in the evening. So he just wrote in the morning on the train, and it's still sufficient to produce 30-odd novels, and very good ones too.
Right.
We are really running out of time. There's 8 minutes left, which is just absolutely flown. Barely feel like I've scratched the surface with you both. We can't go to the pub at the minute. If we could, which one of your characters would you like to go with?
I would probably like to go with Bart Fraser from Sellers Market, who was an expert in French wine, or any wine, and he could pick a dud one just by sniffing the cork. So yeah, I think I'd go with him.
Well, I'd go with Harry Devlin, my first protagonist, the Scouse lawyer, who's very down on his luck, but I've always liked writing that Harry. I'd like to go back to writing that Harry one day, and his character I really enjoy writing about. So I think probably Harry Devlin would be a good guy to go to the pub with. I think.
That does come across really well, and I'll go back up to Kaz has said that you guys are great to listen to, and she's really enjoyed the interview. And she said Sam speaks highly of both your books, so I'll be back on Amazon shortly. So at the very least, you have some books tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent. It's just great to be here anyway.
It's just so much fun. It really is. I love my evenings. Philip Jordan said thank you for such great advice and encouragement.
Well, as I say, the great thing is keep at it, believe in yourself, and even if nobody else does, if you believe in yourself, eventually others will. That's the key. Just don't be despondent, despite all the temptations to be despondent. Just have faith, and things will come right eventually. I'm confident of that.
I always remember the advice I got when I went to my first crime writers meeting, and I met the then chairman, Gavin Lyle, who was prolifically a successful author back then. And I was struggling to find a publisher, but I'd been taken in as a guest, and he said, remember that once you've got your idea, it doesn't work for everybody, but he said, it's worked for me. Make sure you've got your ending lined up. If you've got an ending to the book in mind, you're likely to reach it. If you think you've got a brilliant idea but no ending, you may end up meandering and never finishing it and just drinking the bottle of whiskey instead. And I thought that was terrific advice. And so I've always said when I do talks around the country, may not work for you, but it's worked for me always to know an ending. One of my books has had 3 different ones. It didn't really matter. I put it out to people saying which one's the best ending. But at least I had an ending, because otherwise it probably would have been a bottle of red wine and a bottle of whiskey gone and no happy endings.
We've got a message from Alex Shaw, who I wanted to mention. Good evening, gentlemen. Great to hear from you both. I'm just wondering if
go to the pub with him.
I'd go to the pub with him as well. He's lovely. Oh, I've not my there's books everywhere. I mean, piles and piles. I've not got enough bookshelves. We moved in here a year ago, and pandemic, not got enough bookshelves. I wanted to show you Total Blackout. But anyway, buy Alex's books if you've not read them as well, because they're fantastic. So we love Alex.
Absolutely.
So authors who you would, authors, we've got 4 minutes. So let's see who you would recommend. Who are your go-to authors? Douglas, start with you again.
I learned a lot from reading the books of Frederick Forsyth. I loved, I forget which book it was.
On the shelf behind me, that's one of my favourites.
Really? Right. He wrote one where he was actually sitting in the Kremlin, in the president of the USSR's office, as it then was when it was behind the Iron Curtain. Somehow he'd managed to get in there. And I loved the fact that he'd realised that he could, being an author opens doors, and it does. His book, his style of writing, he just had a way that he could paint a picture very, very readily. I love that. The contemporary authors, I read Peter James, Ian Rankin, and so on, and 1 or 2 of the American authors as well. I tend to read mainly the British ones, though, plus Martin's books, of course.
Martin, how about yourself?
Well, I've loved crime fiction, as I say, from a very young age, and I like a very wide range of books. So it's hard to pick out 1 or 2 names. Certainly, authors of the past, the golden age. Anthony Berkeley is one I'm very keen on. Poison Chocolate's Case, brought back in the British Library's Crime Classics. I actually wrote an extra solution to that one. That was great fun. I loved doing that. In the 50s and 60s, people like Michael Gilbert and Julian Simmons, I'm a big fan of. Again, they've come back in the Crime Classics. We've talked about Reginald Hill, who are the likes of P.D. James and Ruth Rendell, who I think is absolutely brilliant. Certainly the books right up until the mid-90s, and some of the later ones as well, but she was a superstar. And of today, well, of course, I've got many friends who who I greatly admire, the Icelandic writer, Ragnar Jonasson, terrific. Anne Cleves, an old friend of mine, has now become a superstar, but she was writing good books long before.
Which book did you dedicate one first? I can't think off the top of my head. You dedicated one of your books to Anne. Which one was it?
I did. It was Mortmain Hall.
Is it Mortmain Hall?
Yeah. In 30 years of friendship, that was the celebration. And a terrific writer. Peter Robinson, Ian Rankin, Val McDermid, Francis Fifield is a really fine writer, a Gold Dagger winner. Amongst other writers, Priscilla Masters, prolific and I think undervalued, a terrific writer, very entertaining writer indeed. So many great names here, and also in the States. There are some wonderful writers as well. There's a short story writer called Art Taylor who's written some of the best crime short stories of the last 30 years, in my opinion. Won many awards in the States. And if you like short stories, Art Taylor is someone to go to. Andrew Taylor in Britain, one of the greats of modern crime fiction. So many books, not enough time is the basic problem, I think.
Story of my life.
Yeah, absolutely.
And on that note, would either of you like to show off any book covers before we end? It's 8 o'clock. I feel like we could do at least 3 more hours with.
Well, this is the first in the. How do I get it there?
We've learned what you do. You grab and you pull it to you, and you move it to the side of your head. There we go. One of my many notebooks I have around.
My detective Todd Ratso Holton series, and
Ratso's a great name.
Ratso in this one here. This is all about sport match fixing in a whole variety of sports, and it's got a twist in it, so I can't tell you too much about it.
No spoilers.
and Undercurrents is another good one of Doug's, which I can recommend.
I wish I could talk about that. Yes. Another
great. Non-fiction, The Golden Age of Murder was a very lucky book for me. It certainly did my career a lot of good, even though it's non-fiction. That's the story of the evolution of detective fiction and the Detection Club in the 1930s. More recently, I edited the book called How Done It, which really has 90 contributors plus me, and this is about the art and craft of crime writing, but also the nature of the crime writing life. I think it's not just about how to write it, it's about the insights into how writers go about their lives and their work. And it was a wonderful experience to receive all these manuscripts from everybody from John le Carré, Ruth Rendell, Val McDermid, P.D. James, late P.D. James, there's a piece in there. And all these writers, the 90 writers, 60 plus living writers, 20 odd estates, all of them contributed without a fee to raise funds for the Detection Club. And that tells you something, I think, about the cohesive and collegiate nature and the good nature of crime writers. They didn't have to do it, but the generosity was quite overwhelming, and it's a book I'm very proud of. How done it.
And on that note, thank you both so much. What a wonderful hour I've had.
Thank you.
We'll have to get you back for part 2. And Kaz, you're not stealing them. I get part 2.
Really appreciate it. Thanks so much for inviting us.
Great seeing you, Sam, and you, Martin. Good to see you. Bye.
Good to see you. Bye-bye.